Hello everyone, this is Dr. Fox. Let's talk about the pharyngeal muscles and nervous plexus. In this video, we'll describe the muscles that comprise the walls of the pharynx as well as the pharyngeal neural plexus. So let's begin with one of two sets of pharyngeal muscles. These are the pharyngeal constrictor muscles. There is a superior, a middle, and an inferior, and they are stacked like a set of nesting cups. So the superior nests within the middle, which nests within the inferior, like so. These all, when serially constricting, are going to serially constrict the pharynx. So first the superior, then the middle, then the inferior will constrict. All of these muscles are under the control of the pharyngeal neural plexus, which means that efferently they're innervated by branches of cranial nerve 10, the vagus. Along the posterior of the pharynx, each of these muscles meets its contralateral pair along a midline seam called the pharyngeal raphe. From that pharyngeal raphe, each muscle attaches to some element of either the skull, the hyoid, or the larynx anteriorly. So the superior pharyngeal constrictor attaches to a portion of the skull, as well as the buccopharyngeal raphe, as well as a portion of the mandible. So that buccopharyngeal raphe is contiguous with the buccinator muscle. The middle pharyngeal constrictor attaches anteriorly to the hyoid bone. And the inferior pharyngeal constrictor muscle attaches anteriorly to both the thyroid and cricoid cartilages of the larynx. Let's compare these with the longitudinal pharyngeal muscles. So the pharyngeal constrictors serially constrict the pharynx, whereas the longitudinal pharyngeal muscles both shorten and widen the pharynx. They do so by elevating the larynx. Now, both the serial constrictors as well as the longitudinal muscles are going to help move items through the pharynx during deglutition or swallowing. Most of the muscles of the longitudinal pharyngeal muscles are controlled by the pharyngeal neural plexus, with the exception of one, which we will get to. So these muscles attach a variety of places. So let us start with this very interestingly named muscle, the salpingopharyngeus muscle. Salpingopharyngeus muscle, salpinx means horn, so it attaches to tuberous there that surrounds the opening of the pharyngotympanic tube, and it descends down and it is going to insert along the wall of the pharynx in the vicinity of the thyroid cartilage. There's also the palatopharyngeus muscle that goes from the palate down into the wall of the pharynx, adjacent to the thyroid muscle. And then the third muscle, this is interesting, we can see a portion of it here. This is the stylopharyngeus. It goes from the styloid process of the temporal bone, and it inserts between the superior and the middle pharyngeal constrictor. So we can see that muscle coming down here, all the way down, and it inserts directly on the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. As I said before, all of these muscles except one are innervated by the pharyngeal neural plexus. The exception is the stylopharyngeus muscle. Now that stylopharyngeus muscle has a very close relationship with the glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve 9. That is, that nerve runs down along the posterior belly of the muscle. Well, it's the glossopharyngeal nerve which innervates the stylopharyngeus muscle. So let's take a look at the pharyngeal plexus or the pharyngeal neural plexus. Now there are three major inputs to this plexus. There's cranial nerve 9, which is the glossopharyngeal nerves, cranial nerve 10, which are the vagus nerves. And then there are branches from the superior cervical sympathetic ganglia on either side. Now, 9 and 10 both exit through the jugular foramen of the skull. So they exit the cranium together. 9 runs down on the posterior of the belly of Stylopharyngis. And it is the somatic sensory or the afferent contribution from the plexus. So all of the sensory information is being conducted back through glossopharyngeal nerves. Cranial nerve 10, vagus, also exits through the jugular foramen, and it descends down the neck, sending branches to the pharyngeal plexus. Now, vagus does two things for the plexus. The first is that it sends the somatic motor fibers, or the efferent, to the muscles from the plexus. So the vagus nerves are causing all of those pharyngeal constrictor muscles and all of those longitudinal muscles, with the exception of Stylopharyngis, to contract. Vagus also has a second role in sending visceral motor fibers. So these are parasympathetic or autonomic fibers to the mucosa lining the pharynx. So with stimulation, mucus is produced through the glands of the mucosa. The other contribution is from the superior cervical ganglion of the sympathetic trunk, the cervical sympathetic trunk. So there's the superior ganglion, there's the middle, there's the inferior ganglion. And this has a minor contribution, but these sympathetic fibers are vasomotor. So when they stimulate the smooth muscle of the vasculature, it causes vasoconstriction. So it's one way of regulating blood flow through the pharynx. Now, finally, we would be remiss in talking about the pharyngeal neural plexus without mentioning the pharyngeal reflex, aka the gag reflex. So if you've ever experienced something unexpected hitting the back of your throat, you may have had an involuntary immediate response to that, which is a gag. Gagging is meant to expel any foreign bodies from the pharynx that don't belong there. So it has a protective function. Now, what's interesting about the gag reflex is 1/3 of the population has a gag reflex, 1/3 of the population lacks a gag reflex, and 1/3 of the population has a hyper gag reflex that is sufficient to stimulate emesis, or vomiting, with the gag reflex. And this makes sense because a lot of those motor fibers in the pharynx are also innervating the gut tube as well. So let us assess the knowledge. Which muscle of the pharyngeal wall is not innervated by the pharyngeal plexus? Is it the palatopharyngeus? Nope, that is. Is it the salpingopharyngeus? Nope, that is. It is the stylopharyngeus. All of these serial constrictors are innervated by the pharyngeal neural plexus. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video. Bye.